All right, ready to dive deep into something you might think you've already mastered. Talking about the weather in English. We've got language learning guides, real conversations, even a kid's song. All to show you that weather talk can be so much more engaging than you might think.
It really is fascinating, how something so universal can really give you a glimpse into different cultures and regions and just the nuances of language itself.
Exactly. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll be able to go beyond like, it's hot today,
Yeah.
and really paint a picture with your words, maybe even sound like you've lived in different parts of the English-speaking world.
Yeah. Think about it. You're not just learning phrases, you're absorbing the way native speakers actually express themselves.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Fluent U, one of our sources, brings up a great point about elevating those basic weather questions we all know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just asking, how's the weather? Imagine saying, what's it like out there?
Yeah.
It just adds a little something extra.
It does, and it kind of invites a more descriptive response, right? Sets the stage for a richer conversation. Fluent U also suggests awful weather, isn't it? Which, that immediately creates a sense of shared experience.
Right, right. It's like you're already in a conversation instead of just, tossing facts back and forth.
Exact.
And then there's the power of adjectives.
Oh, yeah.
Fluent U is all about using vivid descriptions like, instead of just hot, think scorching, sizzling, or boiling.
Right. If someone tells you it's scorching outside, suddenly you can almost feel the heat radiating off the pavement.
Yeah.
It paints such a more vivid picture compared to just a plain hot day.
Yeah, yeah. It's like turning up the volume on your language. Now, I know what you might be thinking.
What's that?
I already know how to say it's hot. But hold on, because this is where things get really interesting. We're going to explore how weather talk can completely change depending on where you are in the English-speaking world. Chapter 9 of one of our sources dives into these regional differences, and it's fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Regionalisms are a great way to show that you understand not just the language, but also the culture behind it. For instance, Aussies might say, it's a scorcher when it's really hot out, whereas Brits might say, it's peeing down to describe heavy rain.
It's like having a secret code that lets you blend in with the locals.
It is.
And it can lead to some really interesting conversations. We actually have a conversation with Tuli, who's experiencing snow for the first time, in one of our sources.
Oh, wow.
She's originally from Thailand, and her excitement is contagious. It's a good reminder that weather talk can be about sharing those personal experiences, those moments of wonder or even discomfort that we all connect with as human beings.
Absolutely. Imagine you're traveling and you're able to use a local weather expression. Suddenly, you're not just a tourist, you're someone who gets it, someone who appreciates the nuances of their culture.
Totally. But even with all the right vocabulary, there's still that element of like sounding natural, right?
Oh, for sure.
And that's where that English YouTube lesson comes in. It really focuses on these contractions and reductions that native speakers use all the time, but textbooks sometimes miss.
This is where you bridge the gap from just being understood to actually, sounding like you belong in the conversation.
Right. It's like mastering the rhythm and flow of the language. For example, instead of saying, how are you doing? You could say, how you doing?
Right.
It seems small,
Yeah.
but it makes a world of difference in how you come across.
Yeah, these little details, they can really add up to create a more natural and engaging way of speaking. And once you start to notice these, you'll hear them everywhere.
Okay, so we've covered the basics, amped up our adjectives, even touched on some regional expressions. But this is where it gets even more interesting. Oxford Online English points out that weather talk can actually be a launchpad for other topics, like hobbies.
Absolutely. Weather's such a universal experience, it's so easy to find common ground.
Right. For example, they had someone say, my dad got me into photography because of all the incredible sunsets we would watch together.
Oh, wow.
Right.
That's a great example. It shows how a simple conversation about the weather can uncover these shared passions, create unexpected connections.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, what kind of weather-related hobby you might discover or rediscover or get back into. Maybe storm chasing or gardening or just enjoying a cup of coffee while watching the rain.
Right. It's all about making those personal connections that make language come alive.
Hmm?
Even something as simple as a kid's song can teach us about using more descriptive language. One of our sources, Toddler Learning Videos, they use these visuals of dry and wet clothes to teach the concept of dry and wet weather.
Yeah.
Basic, but it got me thinking about how we can use sensory details to make our descriptions more engaging.
Yeah. Instead of just saying it's humid, You can say something like, the air feels so thick and heavy like a wet blanket.
Right.
It instantly creates a more, visceral experience for the person listening.
It does, and that brings us to something even more sophisticated, weather as metaphor. English-speaking success goes deep on this, exploring how we use weather imagery to express abstract ideas.
Think about the phrase, to kick the can down the road, meaning to delay a decision. It's not literally about weather, but that image of pushing a can down the road really captures the feeling of procrastination.
It does. Weather metaphors, they're so powerful because they tap into these shared experiences and emotions, allowing us to connect on this deeper level. I bet you can think of other weather metaphors you use without realizing it. How about like brainstorming or a whirlwind romance? We use them all the time.
It's amazing we could literally do a whole deep dive just on weather metaphors, but for now, let's shift gears and look at how to talk about weather patterns and forecasts.
Good idea. We've been talking about describing the weather we're experiencing right now, but what about predicting what's to come? This is where understanding weather reports becomes so important.
Exactly. And one of our sources actually breaks down all the key elements you'll find in any weather report. Things like temperature, precipitation, wind speed, and it even gives you examples of how those are typically phrased.
It's like a cheat sheet for understanding the language of, meteorologists. And it's good to remember that weather reports can be really different in how much detail they give you. Some might just give you the high and low for the day, while others will go into wind chill, humidity, UV index, you name it.
Right. And there are the visuals, like weather maps. Remember that chapter on regional differences?
Yeah.
Well, it also touches on some basic weather map symbols, like isobars, those lines that connect points of equal atmospheric pressure. I had no idea.
Oh, yeah.
It's like learning a whole new visual language.
Yeah.
And understanding those symbols can give you a much deeper understanding of weather patterns and how they move.
For example, did you know that closely spaced isobars on a weather map, they usually mean there are strong winds? Once you know that, you can look at a map and get a pretty good idea of what kind of weather to expect, even without reading the forecast.
It's like taking control of your own destiny, at least weather-wise. Okay, so we've tackled basic phrases, regionalisms, metaphors, even weather maps. But what about those tricky little words that sometimes trip us up, like hot versus warm, or drizzle versus downpour? Our sources on common mistakes are a goldmine for this.
Oh, absolutely. It's those subtle distinctions that can make or break your fluency, because using the wrong word can sometimes completely change the meaning of what you're saying.
Exactly. And even native speakers get some of these wrong. Apparently raining cats and dogs should only be used for really heavy rain, not just a light drizzle.
Yeah, it's about using the most precise language you can to convey what you mean. And sometimes that means being more specific than you might think.
Totally. And then there's pronunciation. Humidity always gets me. But luckily, our sources point out these common pronunciation pitfalls so we can practice and sound more confident.
It's like having a personal pronunciation coach. The more you practice, the easier those tricky words will become. All right, we've covered a ton of ground here, from basic phrases to metaphors, regional slang, common errors. But there's one more piece to this puzzle: how to actually use all of this in real conversations.
Right, because knowing the words is one thing, but knowing how to weave them into an engaging conversation, that's a whole other skill.
Absolutely. And thankfully, our sources have tons of examples for different situations. At work, with friends, even at parties. It's like a cheat sheet for smooth weather talk.
I love that these examples go beyond just that initial "how's the weather" question. They show you how to keep the conversation flowing, ask follow-up questions, even connect the weather to other topics.
Exactly. It's all about using the weather as the springboard to connect with people in a more meaningful way. And that's what makes language so powerful. Now, speaking of powerful, improve your speaking skills by talking about the weather. One of our sources had this thought-provoking idea.
Oh, yeah. They said that learning a language is like the weather. Unpredictable, sometimes frustrating.
But ultimately rewarding when you stick with it. I love that analogy. Just like weather, you'll have storms and sunny days on your language learning journey. But by staying curious, engaging with all the little details, and practicing consistently, you will reach your destination.
Beautifully said. That is how you turn something as simple as talking about the weather into a masterclass in communication.
Exactly.
Who knew there was so much to it?
Right.
And you know what? I'm actually kind of excited to check out the forecasts now. Maybe even try to decipher a weather map.
I encourage you to.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to try new phrases, observe how people talk about the weather in different places, and see where your conversations go. Every conversation is a chance to learn and grow.
Beautifully said. All right, listeners, time to go out there and make some weather magic.
Happy chatting.
Okay, so, we've talked about how using really vivid language and regionalisms can spice up our weather conversations.
Yeah.
But how about taking it a step further?
Okay.
What about using weather talk to, really connect with people on a deeper level? Maybe spark a new friendship or discover a shared passion.
Now that's where things get really interesting. Whether it's such a universal experience, it's a natural starting point for conversation. But the key is to go beyond just those initial pleasantries and really look for those points of connection.
Exactly. Remember that example from Oxford Online English
Yeah.
where somebody said their dad got them into photography
Yeah.
because of all the amazing sunsets they used to watch together?
Oh, wow.
It's such a simple story,
Yeah.
but it opens up all these possibilities.
It does. It reminds us that even casual conversations about the weather can reveal these hidden depths and shared interests. It's almost like you're using weather as this metaphorical key to unlock these deeper connections.
It really makes you wonder what kind of weather-related memories or passions you might have tucked away, just waiting to be shared.
Right.
Maybe you have a favorite childhood memory of playing in the rain. Or maybe you're secretly fascinated by storm clouds.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe sharing that memory or that passion could be the thing that sparks a new friendship or rekindles an old one. The best conversations often start with something simple and relatable, like the weather.
That's true.
And sometimes even the most basic examples can inspire us to think about language in these new ways. Remember those toddler learning videos we talked about?
Yeah.
They used visuals of dry and wet clothes to teach dry and wet weather.
It's so basic.
So basic. But it got me thinking about how we can use sensory details to make descriptions more vivid and engaging.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like we're tapping into those early childhood learning experiences where we first learn about the world through our senses. And by bringing those sensory details into the language, we can create a much richer experience for the listener.
Instead of just saying, it's humid, imagine saying, the air feels so thick and heavy like a wet blanket clinging to my skin.
Ooh, yeah.
It instantly creates a more visceral experience for the listener.
Absolutely. It's like you're inviting them to step right into your shoes and feel that humidity.
Yeah.
And speaking of creating these vivid experiences, let's not forget about the power of weather metaphors.
Oh, yeah.
English-speaking success dives deep into this, exploring how we use weather imagery to express these abstract ideas. It's fascinating how these metaphors become so ingrained in our language, we often use them without even realizing it.
And that's what makes them so powerful.
It is.
They tap into our shared experiences and emotions, creating this instant connection between the speaker and the listener, like to kick the can down the road.
Right.
Meaning to delay a decision. It's not literally about weather, but that image of pushing a can further down a path just perfectly captures that feeling of procrastination.
It does. It's such a common experience. We've all been there. That's why these metaphors resonate so strongly. They tap into those universal human experiences that connect all of us.
They're everywhere, too. Think about phrases like brainstorming or a whirlwind romance.
Right.
They paint such vivid pictures in our minds, even though they're not literally about the weather.
It's like we're using the language of weather to describe the storms and the sunshine in our own lives, and that just brings a whole other dimension to our conversations.
Okay, so we've explored how weather talk can connect us on an emotional level, spark new interests, and even add depth and imagery to our language. But let's not forget the practical side of things.
Yep.
We also need to be able to understand and talk about weather patterns and forecasts, especially if we're traveling or planning any outdoor activities.
For sure. And luckily, one of our sources breaks down the key elements that you'll find in any weather report, making it way easier to decipher all that meteorological jargon.
Yeah, they cover everything. Temperature, precipitation, wind speed, humidity, they've got it all. And they even give these examples of how those elements are usually phrased, which is super helpful for understanding those sometimes cryptic weather reports.
Like having a cheat sheet for the language of meteorologists.
Totally.
And it's important to remember that weather reports can be really different in how much detail they give you.
Right.
Some might just give you the high and low for the day, while others might go into wind chill, UV index, all sorts of other factors.
True. And then there are those visual representations like weather maps, which can be incredibly helpful for understanding weather patterns and how they move.
Weather maps can seem a little daunting at first, but once you understand the basic symbols, they can actually be quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Remember that chapter on regional differences? Well, it also mentions some basic weather map symbols, like isobars. You know those lines that connect points of equal atmospheric pressure.
It's like learning a whole new visual language.
It is.
And understanding those symbols can give you a much deeper understanding of weather patterns and how they move.
Right. Like, did you know that closely spaced isobars on a weather map usually mean strong winds?
No.
Once you know that, you can just look at a map and have a pretty good idea of what to expect, even without reading the forecast.
It's empowering, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're not at the mercy of the weather report anymore. You can start to interpret the data for yourself and make more informed decisions about your day,
It's like you're taking control of your own destiny.
at least as far as the weather's concerned. All right, so we've tackled basic phrases, regionalisms, metaphors, even weather maps. But what about those tricky little words?
Yeah.
You know, those ones that sometimes trip us up, like hot versus warm, or drizzle versus downpour. Our sources on common mistakes are pure gold for this.
They are. It's those subtle distinctions that can really make or break your fluency, because using the wrong word can sometimes completely change what you're trying to say.
Exactly. And even native speakers get some of these wrong. You know, raining cats and dogs should only be used for really heavy rain, not just a light drizzle.
It's about choosing the most precise language to get your meaning across. And sometimes that means being more specific than you might think.
Totally. And then there's pronunciation. Humidity always gets me. But our sources highlight those common pronunciation pitfalls so we can practice and sound more confident.
It's like having a pronunciation coach in your pocket. And the more you practice, the more natural those tricky words will become.
Speaking of navigating storms, let's not forget the ultimate goal of all this language learning, actually using it in real conversations. We've absorbed tons of information about weather talk, but how do we actually put it into practice and connect with people in a meaningful way?
That is the million-dollar question, and luckily our sources provide so many examples for different situations, from casual chats with friends to more formal interactions at work. It's like a conversational cheat sheet for navigating the world of weather talk.
What I love is that these examples go beyond that initial "how's the weather" question.
Right.
They show you how to keep the conversation going, ask those follow-up questions, and even connect the weather to other topics like hobbies or travel plans or even current events.
Exactly. It's all about using the weather as a starting point, a common ground that you can branch out from to explore other areas of the conversation. And the more you practice this, the more natural it will become. You'll start seeing these connections and opportunities for conversation everywhere.
For example, instead of just saying, "it's hot," you could say, "it's so hot today, I'm thinking about going for a swim later. Do you like swimming?"
Right.
Suddenly you've opened up a whole new avenue for conversation.
Exactly. It's all about using the weather as a way to connect with people on a more personal level. And that's what makes language so powerful. It lets us bridge those gaps between ourselves and others, creating a sense of shared experience and understanding. Now, improve your speaking skills by talking about the weather, one of our sources, had a really interesting point.
Yeah.
They compared learning a language to the weather itself,
They said it can be unpredictable, sometimes frustrating.
but ultimately rewarding when you persevere. I just love that analogy. Just like with the weather, you'll have storms and sunny days on your language learning journey, but by staying curious, engaging with those nuances, and practicing consistently, you'll eventually reach your destination.
Beautifully said. And that is how you turn something as simple as talking about the weather into a masterclass in communication.
It really is.
Who knew there was so much depth to this everyday topic?
It is amazing what you can learn when you take the time to really delve into something, isn't it?
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe your next chat about the weather will spark a new friendship or lead you to a fascinating new hobby.
Yeah.
The possibilities are endless.
Absolutely. The world is full of wonder and connection, and language is the key to unlocking it all.
This has been such an insightful journey. I feel like I've definitely leveled up my weather talk. And you know what? I'm kind of excited to check out the forecast now.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe even try deciphering a weather map.
I encourage you to. And don't be afraid to experiment with new phrases. Observe how people talk about the weather in different places.
Right.
And just see where your conversations go.
Yeah.
After all, every conversation is a chance to learn and grow.
Beautifully said. All right, listeners, time to go out there and make some weather magic.
Happy chatting.
It's funny, isn't it, how we kind of take something as simple as weather talk for granted.
Yeah.
But after all this, I'm seeing it in a whole new way. It's not just about like exchanging information,
Right.
It's a way to connect with people, share experiences, even learn about different cultures.
Absolutely. And it's something everyone can relate to, no matter your background or your language level. Weather is that universal thing. You know, it transcends borders, brings us together.
And what I really like is how even just a casual conversation about the weather can spark something so much deeper.
Uh,
Whether it's a new friendship or a shared passion or just like a moment of connection with another person.
those small moments can really make a difference. You know, they create a sense of community and belonging that goes way beyond just that initial conversation.
It's amazing how something as simple as just talking about the weather can have such a big impact. And it reminds us that even, the everyday things can be filled with so much wonder and connection if we just kind of stop to appreciate them.
Yeah, it's all about shifting our perspective, seeing the beauty in those ordinary things.
hmm
And who knows, maybe your next conversation about the weather will lead you to something extraordinary.
I'm definitely feeling inspired to go out there and use all these newfound weather talk skills.
Mm.
Maybe I'll even impress someone with my knowledge of isobars.
I think you will. And remember, don't be afraid to experiment,
Right.
make mistakes, and most importantly, have fun with it. The more you practice, the more confident and natural you'll become.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I've not only learned a bunch of new words, but also gained a deeper appreciation for, the power of language and connection.
That's what it's all about. And remember, learning a language, it's just like the weather, full of surprises, challenges, and those moments of pure joy.
So to all our listeners out there, go out and embrace the power of weather talk. You never know where it might take you.
Happy chatting! And may your conversations be full of sunshine and a gentle breeze.